In the last video, I showed you how to add interactivity to your app widget. In this video, I want to show you how I built that Streaks app and widget. However, before we begin, I want you to understand that my main goal was to try out the interactive widget part. And so I really rushed building the app and widget, and I favored speed over everything else. I did this app and widget really quick and dirty. So all of that to say, don't use this code for production. However, you would still be able to get an idea of what you have to do by watching this tutorial. All right, with that said, let's dive in. So before we start, I just want to mention that we are using Xcode 15 beta in this video, just in case in the future your Xcode 15 looks different or there are some bugs, because beta software is constantly changing, but we have to use this for our widget interactivity features that we want to show now. So first, we're going to create a new Xcode project. Under iOS, let's choose app, and I'm going to call this widget demo. Interface is Swift UI, language is Swift. The rest is like that. Pretty much, you can leave it untouched. I'm going to save it on my desktop, which is already cluttered and full of stuff. And what we're going to do first is add the counter and the button, because this is a Streaks app. So first of all, let's declare a variable at the top. Let's call it streak, and this is going to be initialized to 0, and then we are going to add the button. So actually, before we do that, if any of this is unfamiliar to you, if this is the first video you're ever watching on Code with Chris, please watch the how to make an app in 8 days series first. I'll link it in the video right now. A little card will pop up, but that will show you the basics of building UIs and using buttons and text labels and things like that, if you are brand new. So for the text, I want to show the streak counter. Okay, and below that, I want to put a button. And we're going to use this one right here. Okay, so for the action, I'm going to increase the streak, but so we're going to do streak plus equal 1. We're going to get an error for that. Okay, so the button will say +1, and when they tap it, it will add 1 to the streak. Now, this cannot be modified because it is immutable, which means that it can't be modified. But what we can do is we can use the app storage property wrapper to make sure that this value gets saved over multiple app sessions. So essentially, it stores that value onto disk on your device. And it'll also let us change that value, which is what we want as well. So let's go ahead and use this app storage property wrapper. Okay, and then we'll be able to try this out. All right, it didn't start at 0 because I actually did this before, and I used the same thing, so it's reading from disk. So anyways, it is there. Okay, the next part we're going to do is to be adding the progress ring. And for that, I learned how to do it from Cavsoft. Shout out to him and his channel. He does some amazing work with animations, user interaction, building UIs. So definitely go there if you want to learn about how to build these beautiful experiences. And that's where I learned how to build this progress ring. So the way that he's done it is to use a Z-stack and layer 2 circles on top of each other. The bottom one is for the track, the top one is for the progress. So let me show you what he's done and what I've learned. Actually, before we do that, let's change the background to black, because I want to make, that'll allow my ring to show up better. So all I'm doing is adding a black color as the background, and I am going to put my V-stack inside, or on top, sorry, of the black. All right, and I also have to just change my foreground color to, actually, what did that say right there? Foreground style, that's what we're supposed to use now in iOS 17. Oh, but I don't want to change that. I don't want to change my button color. All right, we'll do that. Okay, as for the ring, we are going to do this. Oops. And then we're going to layer 2 circles on top of another. So there's the first circle. It's actually black, so you can't see it, but a black circle has appeared. But what we're going to do is add a stroke to it. And that is, the stroke is the path. So we're going to color the path. So the outer ring of the circle. Are you familiar with those terms? They're used in a lot of design programs. Fill is like, a shape is a line, right? So a circle is like that. The stroke is the line itself, and fill is like the area inside the space. So I'll show you what I mean. There, that's stroke, the blue circle. And if I did, in Adobe Photoshop or another program, fill would be the area inside. So you can choose a fill color, you can choose a stroke color, and they can be different. In here in Swift UI, this is the stroke color. If you want to fill it, that would be foreground style, I guess now they use. So for color, I want to use white, but I want to change the opacity to semi-transparent. So you can actually barely see it, but we're actually going to use line width instead and make it 20 so you can see it. And I'm going to add a little bit of padding to this. Maybe 50. All right. So now we're going to add the circle on top of it. So we're just going to do it again. Right. So for example, I can even copy that and I can change this to blue. All right. So you don't see the track anymore because it's completely filled, but here's another modifier that you can use: trim from and to. So you can trim from, let's say, 0 to halfway. You're gonna see what happens. And that's what you get. Now, if you want to start your ring at the top right here, like right now it's starting from, I don't know, from here or here. I actually don't know. But if you want to start from here, all you need to do is rotate your circle by, if you're going to rotate counterclockwise, that's actually minus 90 degrees. So you're going to do a rotation effect, and the angle, the degrees, sorry, is going to be minus 90 degrees. So then it actually starts from the top. So you can see if you do like 34%, it's going to start from the top and sort of go. The other thing is that you can see how these corners are sharp. If you wanted to make them round, which I think looks better, instead of putting the line width here, you should use the other one. There was another one where you could specify a style, and here you're going to specify a stroke style instead. Oops, because I'm not that familiar. Let's use autocomplete. Where'd it go? Okay, so anyways, there's line width, which we want to be 20. There's line cap, and there's line join. Those are the ones we want to specify. So line width is 20. Line cap is going to be round. So you could see that already makes a huge difference. And line join is also round. So this is what CavSoft did. I'm going to listen to him. Okay, so there's essentially our ring. I want to put the count in the center, and I also want to put a streak text there. Okay, so let's, inside this circle here, we're going to put that text right here, but we're also going to put another piece of text. This is a Z stack, so we're going to put a V stack in here. Let's put a foreground style white in on the V stack itself, so it modifies all of the text elements inside. All right. So let's make that a little bigger. Font system size of 70. Okay. Maybe we'll bold it. And then furthermore, we are going to say font design rounded. And that gives everything a rounded look. Okay, now as for this button, I think this needs a little bit of work, and perhaps there should be some padding between the ring and the button. So we can add a little bit of spacing there. For this, why don't we add a rounded rectangle. Foreground, oh, we gotta use foreground style now. Foreground style dot blue, and let's give this a height. What happened? Rounded rectangle. Oh, we're missing the corner radius part of it. My text. There we go. Okay, so let's increase that spacing a little bit more. Actually, you know what? I think what we can do instead is add some spacers. Spacers. Okay, yeah, let's get rid of the spacing. So there's a spacer right there. Let's add one between the button. So we could keep that button at the bottom so it gets easier to press, or you can space everything out like that if you'd like. Kind of like the button at the bottom. So we'll do that. So it makes it really easy to tap, and it keeps this in the center as well. Now it's time to add a widget extension to our project. Before we do that, let's actually run our project in the simulator to make sure that sort of what we expect. We've only done it inside the canvas here. All right, so here we have it. We are going to, yep. Okay, so let's try to, I can't delete it, but what I can do is try to kill the app and launch it again, and you can see app storage is working as expected. All right, cool. So that actually killed the project when I killed the app. Now we're gonna add our widget extension. So where we do this is we go to File, New, and we're going to add a new target to this project. And you're going to search for widget, and we're going to add this widget extension. So here you can call it whatever you want. Let's just call it widget demo and I don't know, widget extension. We are not going to include any of these things. Okay. And this stuff should be pretty much set to that, like your own project. Let's click finish. And then when it asks you if you want to add a widget extension scheme, say yes or activate. And what that's going to do up here is it's going to allow you to select whether you want to run the app or the widget. If you accidentally clicked no or cancel, you can always add it yourself by going to manage schemes like I just did, and then click plus, and then you can choose that and you can add that scheme. But for now, I mean, because I clicked activate or yes, now I have that. Okay, so let's take a look at the code of the widget. So at first this was really confusing for me too, because there's actually quite a bit of code that it generates for you. So what I'm going to do is try to collapse some of it here so that it's easier for you to see, and I'm going to try to explain it in a way that makes it easy to understand. Okay, so this is the preview. This is just what you're seeing here. This widget extension, which adheres to this protocol, this is the actual widget itself. Okay, so let's see what is inside here. So first of all, there is a string, a kind. This is sort of like the identifier for your widget. You can think of it that way. This body property, this is the actual guts of your widget. A static configuration is a type of widget that you can have. There are actually multiple types. As far as I know, there are 3. So let me pull up this piece of documentation from Apple, And again, all of these links will be below. So, okay, static widgets use a static configuration. Other widgets are app intent configuration widgets. They use user customization, such as weather widget that needs a zip or postal code, or package tracking widget, which needs a tracking number. There's activity configuration, which is used for live data like sports games or food delivery estimate or things like that. So static configuration is sort of like your general basic one. These ones, app intent and activity, are more for specific use cases, I would say. Now, for static configuration, here's how it works. You have to pass in the kind, which is sort of the identifier. That's what we specified up here. And this is important because inside the app, we are able to issue a command to say like update this widget. And that's where we'd have to specify the kind. So we do have to take note of that. The provider is the supplier of the data. Think of it like that, to the widget. And we'll dive into that in a second. And then this part, this closure, this is the actual view of your widget. So that's what you see right here. And you can see in this boilerplate code, this refers to this view right here. Right? This boilerplate code is what you're seeing up here. Okay, and then this is just some metadata for your widget. Another thing you can add is supported families, because there's different sizes of widgets. There's like small and medium. Is there a large? Yeah, there's a large. So you can see I'm new to widgets. But I am going to constrict this widget to small because I haven't designed for the other sizes. Yeah. Okay, so this is your actual widget. Now the next thing to explore, let's explore the provider. This is up here, timeline provider. This supplies the data. In order to understand this behemoth, why don't we also pull up some documentation? So this took me a little bit to understand when I first got into building a widget, is that your widget isn't always live. Because if that were the case, if the user has a ton of widgets on the home screen, it would just like eat up all the resources of the device. So widgets are actually very lightweight. And the way it works is via a timeline. So what the timeline provider provides is a snapshot of what the widget should show at certain times of the day. So let's say that at this timeline right here is right now, right? You have a snapshot. This is what your widget should show. When the widget asks the timeline provider for data, it actually doesn't just request the data like the snapshot for right now, but it asks for a snapshot from now into the foreseeable future. So your provider might specify snapshots for right now, an hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, so 4 snapshots in total, and it gives it all to the widget right away. And then what the system does is it takes all of those snapshots and creates what the view should look like based on that data, like right there ahead of time. And then so when an hour passes, it just takes that view and plops it on your widget. 2 hours later, it will take that pre-rendered view it made before and then plop it on that widget, and so on and so forth. So it only asks the timeline provider for data at certain times, not all the time. There are manual ways for you to trigger your widget to ask the provider for a fresh set of data, fresh set of snapshots and new timeline and everything. But you are only allowed a certain budget to do that. Your app is, I should say. So that way, no app could, constantly try to be refreshing the widget and just hogging all the resources, right? Now, the first question in my head when I learned about this, how widgets work, is like, how can I provide data into the future? How will I know what my widget should show 3 hours in the future? Right? Because I don't have that data right now that you're asking me for it. Well, there are certain, types of use cases where you might have an idea of what that widget should look like 3 hours later. For example, your widget is a countdown to something, right? So that makes sense. When your widget asks the timeline provider for a snapshot in the timeline, you're able to supply the countdown timer status right now but you're also able to predict what that countdown timer should look like 1 hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, 4 hours later, right? Until all the way until the countdown is 0. So, in that scenario, it's really easy for the timeline provider to provide all of these snapshots far into the future until the countdown is 0. Another example, let's say it's a widget to remind you about when you should drink your next glass of water. Maybe you want to space it out throughout the day and make sure you get enough hydration. So your widget gives you, reminds you, it shows right there in the widget, like you should drink water right now. Well, if there's a schedule of when you should drink water, then your timeline provider would be able to predict in the future, 3 hours later, I should, show a drink water message on the widget or something like that. So you'd be able to supply that data ahead of time. So all of this stuff that we just talked about actually is covered pretty well in this documentation called Keeping a Widget Up to Date and various strategies and ways to do that. So there's some really good charts here that you can see. And this talks about planned reloads with a budget, what we talked about, how the widget stays up to date. There are a couple of instances where you can tell your widget to update and it doesn't count against the quota. So one of those scenarios is when your app is launched and is in the foreground. So when our Streaks app is in the foreground, we're going to be able to issue commands to update the widget for free. The other time is when the user interacts with the widget. Now that there's widget interactivity, right? So when we add a button here, if they tap the button, we get to update the widget for free. So that's awesome. So we can use those two scenarios really to our advantage. Okay, so let's take a look at this code right here and let's see what they've written for us. So inside this timeline provider, you can see this provider adheres to the timeline provider protocol and it needs to have a couple of methods. So let's go through placeholder and get snapshot first. What do these two things do? Let's take a look at some documentation. And this is the timeline provider documentation. If we scroll down, it's going to show us what those methods are for. Get snapshot provides a timeline entry that represents the current time and state of a widget is required. Placeholder provides a timeline entry representing a placeholder version of the widget. So this placeholder is in a couple of cases. For example, when the user is about to add your widget to his or her home screen, they launch the widget gallery, they see a placeholder. Like this is what generates that placeholder widget that they see. Okay, and get snapshot, as we just saw, provides an instance in time of what that widget should look like. Okay, and finally get timeline. Let's take a look at that. Provides an array of timeline entries for the current time and optionally future times to update the widget. So if you know beforehand what that widget should look like 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours later, that's when you provide it. Okay, so now let's take a look at the code inside here actually. So it's, you see this other thing called simple entry, right? Simple entry, if you go down right here, that's adheres to timeline entry. This is the data for a single snapshot. And as for this placeholder example, the data that they use for the widget is an emoji and a date. So that is the data for a snapshot. So in the placeholder that is supposed to provide, a placeholder version of the widget, they're creating a snapshot with the current date and a smiley emoji. Okay. For get snapshot, they're providing some data with the current date and an emoji. In get timeline, you have to provide an array, right, of snapshots going forward. So what they're doing here is they're taking the current date and time and they are adding from 0 to 5 hours or 0 to 4 hours into the future. And each iteration, they are just taking the date and adding that offset right there, and the emoji remains the same. And so what they're passing back as a timeline is essentially 4 or 5 snapshots where the time is an hour ahead, 2 hours ahead, 3 hours ahead, 4 hours ahead with the same smiley emoji. So that's the boilerplate code. The last thing we haven't talked about is the widget extension entry view. So this provides the view. As you can see, there's a body property, and this contains the view code. And this is a VStack with the time right here and the emoji right here. So hopefully that gives you an understanding about the boilerplate code for the widget. Now let's customize this so that actually shows what we want to show and gets the data, the streak data that we want. So speaking about the data, how are we supposed to get this app storage data, the streak counter? How are we supposed to get a hold of this streak from here? Right? Because they're two different targets. And if you try to do it, your chances are, I don't think I have actually tried this, but I don't believe that they are actually reading from the same store. So what you have to do is use something called an app group. And it is, think of it as a way for multiple targets to share resources, including data. So what we're going to do is create an app group. We are going to put the widget demo, which is the app, and we're going to put the widget extension in the same app group. And that way they can be reading from the same app storage. And they can be then both reading this streak value. Let's go into the project properties here. And then we're going to go into the widget demo target. And then we are going to go into signing and capabilities and hit this little plus icon here. And we're going to search for app groups, which actually is just here. So go ahead, double click that. And then it's going to add this section, app groups here. I already have one here because I created one for a previous demo, but I'm going to create a new app group just to show you how it would work. Click this plus icon and you're going to name it the same thing. So let me just, so here is com.codewithchris.widget demo with no space in between or dash or anything like that. So this would be, you can name it whatever you want, but I think generally this is what people recommend for you to do. So it would be your identifier with a group in front of it. Okay, so that's right there, group.com.codewithchris.widget demo. And what we're going to do is go into the widget extension, and we're going to do the same thing under signing and capabilities. So go to app groups, we're going to add it. You're going to hit the plus icon here, and then you're either going to see the one that you just added. If not, we're going to type it in exactly the same as what we typed in last time, widget demo, right? So they should both be sharing and using the same app group. Okay, so I'm going to press Command B to build the project. All right, build succeeded. All right, you see it's not red anymore. And both targets under app groups, they are using the exact same one, group.com.codewithchris.widget demo with no spaces or dashes in between widget demo. Okay, so now that they're in the same app group, they can share some resources. So for example, in this streak that I am storing in app storage, I am going to explicitly specify for it to store this data in the app group. And this is how we can do that. We can say the store, right, and specifically use user defaults with this app group name. So group.com.codewithchris.widget demo. All right, so it's going to store this streak in that app storage container. Okay, so let me run it now. Run the app version. We're going to update the counter so that we know it's actually working. Okay, so it's 0 because it's reading from a new storage container. I hit +1, and so it's going to have stored it in here, okay? And then now on the widget side, we just access the same storage, and then we can get the value. So in the widget extension, let's add a new struct to help us manage the data. And let's just call this DataService. Now this is where you get tricky when you have multiple targets. I'm actually going to include this in the widget extension. Right? That's what you should do. And so it's going to be added here. And then in here, we got to import Swift UI, struct DataService, and then we're essentially going to have the same thing, right? App storage, so we're actually going to make this private variable streak. So it can't be accessed directly, and instead they're going to need to access it through these functions right here. So we're going to say streak plus equal 1. We're going to do another one where this one returns an int, and we're just going to return streak. So let's just break this up a little bit so it gets a little easier to read. Okay, so that's going to be our data service. Then what we're going to do inside our widget extension is read that data. So inside the widget here, the timeline provider, why don't we, actually the first thing I'll do is change the simple entry. So we can keep the date, but no emoji. Instead, I'm going to have this be an integer representing the streak. That's going to break a whole ton of stuff in here. So we'll let it break for now. We're going to create a new data service here. And then for this simple entry, we're just going to put streak data.progress. And then in the get snapshot, we're going to do the same thing here. That's going to return to us the current streak. And then inside get timeline, going to do that. This doesn't really matter because we're going to be updating the widget when the user interacts with it by tapping the button, or when the user launches the app and logs an entry, we're going to update the widget. Okay, now we're going to update the UI here. So let's run the preview and then let's change this. So, and then the text here, let's actually go ahead and declare the data service here. And then in here, we're going to say data.progress. Let's see if we can see anything. Okay, so there's an, oh, down here, yeah, these are for the preview. So let's just do that for the preview. Now I'm going to run the app. Okay, so that's the streak. In terms of the widget, let's run the widget. So we're going to choose widget extension and then run it. And it should install the widget for us. Running widget extension on iPhone. It may come if we give it a little bit of time. If not, we can add it manually. Just tap and hold the home screen, click on this plus, and we'll search for it right here. There it is. Streak 2, add widget. Okay, so that's essentially what our streak looks like. If our preview would load, you'd see that it looks like the same thing. So when I tap on this, it launches in here, and then, yeah, you can see there it is. When I add +1 and I go back to the widget, it doesn't update because what we have to do inside the app, inside here is when +1 is tapped on, we can issue that command to update the widget manually, and it will be free because our app is in the foreground. So let's do that right now. Actually, before we do that, we have to finish building the UI. Just realized that. Yeah, we didn't finish building that UI. So let's go ahead. Like I said, this was quick and dirty. So what I did here is essentially copy and paste my UI. So all I really wanted was the ring here. That's what I copied. The Z stack containing the 2 circles and the streak text. So I'm literally going to copy that. And this is the view for the widget. Right now it's a V stack. Right, so I'm actually going to just paste that in there. I'm going to remove that text. And this would be data.progress. And we're going to obviously change the font size so it's not so big. And yeah, it kind of looks like that. All right. Oh, perhaps we could add a little bit of padding. All right. And if you wanted to make that font a different size, you could try that. Right. Okay. So now if we run it, give it a couple of seconds and it should, yeah, it'll update. Okay. So now it's actually looking like more like what it's supposed to look. Oh, one thing we didn't change actually is the progress, right? That doesn't actually change here. So what we have to do is let percentage equals, so essentially the current progress divided by whatever you want this to be out of. Let's say they need to do it 50 times. Then you're going to write 50. And we've got to make sure, if you want a decimal, make sure these are both doubles. Okay, so that is going to be for the app. Right, this is content view, this is the app. We're going to do the same thing for the widget extension. So here, because that's an int, right? So we are going to cast it as a double. Casting just means that you're going to treat it as a double, and or trying to convert it to a double. And then here, you're going to, instead of that, you're going to put the actual percentage that they've got complete out of 50. So let's give that a try. All right, so yeah. So now the bar actually moves. That was a big oversight. But when I'm tapping this, it's actually not telling the widget to update. So yeah, that hasn't updated. So let's issue a command to manually update the widget from within the app. So first, inside the widget extension, take note of this kind. This is sort of like the ID for your widget. And then inside the app, when the button is tapped, we're going to manually reload the widget. So this is done through Widget Center, shared, reload timelines of kind, and then this is where you would put, you know, that widget of kind widget extension. So now if we run this, can I find Widget Center? Yeah. There we go. Should be it. What did I run? Oh, I ran the widget extension instead of the widget app. Okay, there we go. Here's the app. So now when I increase the widget, increase the streak in the app, and I go to the widget, you see it's updated right away. Right? Because when I'm tapping that button, it's telling Widget Center to reload this widget. And then this widget is calling the timeline provider to get a new snapshot. So now the last part before we end this video is I want to show you how I set the project up to add interactivity to the widget. Because I told you in the interactivity video, now there is a button that accepts an app intent. So when you tap on that button in the widget, it's going to run the app intent. But I never showed you how to build that app intent. So it's actually pretty simple. Let's go ahead and do that inside the widget extension. So we're going to add a new file, a Swift file. And yep, this is part of the widget extension target. And I'm going to call this log entry app intent. So this is going to get fired when the button is going to be tapped on. And this is based off of this documentation, which I'll link to in the description below as well. So providing your app's capabilities to system services, this is how you create an app intent. Essentially, you have to adhere to or conform to the app intent protocol. You have these two, title and description. And then the other part which you need is here, perform the action for your intent, this method right here. Okay, so those are the parts we are going to take from the documentation. App intents, there we go. And we need this part, the perform part. And so what I did before was I added the protocol stubs, but I wasn't exactly sure about what it provided me. So I followed the documentation instead by taking that piece, the actual thing that it was going to do, and these two pieces, which are metadata for this app intent that I guess shows up when you want to use this app intent with Siri shortcuts or anything like that. Log an entry to your streak, or yeah. Something like that. It's basically title and description, but this is the most important part. What do you want to actually do? Right? So we want to log, right? So this increases the streak by 1, and then we are going to return the latest value. That's it. If it can't find DataService in this scope, you might want to double check that the target membership for this app intent is the widget extension, as well as the DataService as is also same, it's in the same target. And then sometimes that still won't do it. Clean build folder. Yeah, just clean build folder, and then just rebuild it. Command B. Should be good. So now that we have the app and the widget and the app intent, you're perfectly set up to add an interactive button to your widget. And you can see how to do that in the video right over there. Now, if you want to learn how to build apps and how to publish into the App Store, consider joining CWC Plus, our training program designed specifically to help you do that. Links below. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.